The woman no one wanted. Elena Carter lived in the quiet corner of a town that people only passed through, never truly noticed. Her modest home stood behind a row of tired shops and rusting fences, tucked between a closed-down bakery and an auto garage that coughed smoke day and night. She worked as a seamstress in the back of a thrift store, mending other people's discarded clothes while dreaming of crafting something beautiful of her own, one day. But the world rarely made room for women like her. She was too large, too poor, too different, as they whispered. She had the kind of body that made dressmakers sigh and say, "We don't carry your size." Her cheeks, round and flushed, made children stare and women glance sideways. Yet beneath the layers of ridicule and rejection lived a woman of quiet brilliance, soft-spoken but sharp-witted, generous despite scarcity, observant in ways others ignored. Her mother had died when Elena was just 16. Her father left not long after, packing up his guilt and vanishing into the night. That left Elena and her younger brother, Liam, to fend for themselves. He was her anchor in every storm, cheeky, loyal, and fiercely protective. But even he couldn't shield her from the ache of being unwanted. She was 28 now. Suitors had come and gone, mostly pushed away by cruel gossip or the uncomfortable truth that Elena wasn't considered beautiful by the town's narrow standards. Marriage proposals were a fantasy. She had stopped believing they would ever come. Until he arrived. Nathaniel Hayes was nothing like the men in town. He didn't smell of rust and sweat, and he didn't carry the bitterness of small dreams turned stale. He walked with a confidence that wasn't arrogance, just certainty. His eyes weren't greedy, but curious. He had stepped into the thrift store one rainy Thursday afternoon, looking for nothing in particular, but stayed when he saw Elena hunched over a torn evening gown with silver trim. Their first words were simple. "You're good at that," he'd said, watching her fingers dance over fabric. Elena had looked up cautiously. He was tall, dressed in a black coat that cost more than her monthly rent. "Thank you," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. He didn't walk away. Instead, he asked questions. About the dress. About stitching. About her hands. In the days that followed, he kept returning, always with a reason, though none of them made much sense. A cufflink repair. A button loose. A scarf to mend. Word spread fast in the small town. People whispered that the heir to the Hayes estate, a family worth millions, was talking to her. Some believed it was a cruel joke. Others thought maybe Elena had done something manipulative. But she knew the truth. He made her laugh, and she made him pause. By the third week, he asked her to join him for tea. Elena stayed at the invitation card for nearly an hour before saying yes. It wasn't the kind of thing men like Nate did with women like her. But something in his voice, soft and honest, made her feel less like an outsider and more like someone worth seeing. Over tea, they talked for hours. About cities she had never visited, and books he thought she'd love. She told him about Liam, about the nights she stitched by candlelight, about the ache that lived in the space her mother left behind. He listened. No one had ever really listened. By the end of the evening, he looked at her like a man seeing something rare. But when Elena returned home that night, her heart warred with her mind. It couldn't be real. Men like Nate didn't belong in her story. Liam watched her closely. "You're smiling like someone who's scared to hope," he teased. "I'm not stupid, Liam. He'll realize I'm not what he thinks." "Or maybe," Liam replied, folding his arms, "you're exactly what he thinks, and is just brave enough to say it." Elena didn't answer. She looked out the window at the dim street light flickering over cracked pavement. The feeling blooming in her chest was terrifying. Hope, fragile and hungry. But she reminded herself, fairy tales weren't written for women like her. Still, when she closed her eyes that night, she whispered one impossible thing. Let him be different. A proposal from the clouds. The first time Elena stepped into the Hayes estate, she felt like an imposter in a story not written for her. The marble floors echoed beneath her worn flats. Chandeliers glittered overhead like icicles waiting to fall. Everything in the grand foyer, from the pale ivory vases to the silent maid who took her coat, whispered that she didn't belong. But Nate smiled as though she were the only one who did. "I want you to see what I see," he told her gently, offering his hand. "Not all of this," He waved at the extravagant hall. But you, in a world that never told you yes. Elena wanted to believe him, and slowly, she began to. Nate introduced her to a new rhythm of life. Weekend lunches at rooftop cafes, slow walks in flower gardens that never wilted, poetry readings she didn't understand but admired for their passion. She wore simple dresses, and he never asked her to change. His compliments were not loud or rehearsed, but quiet and intimate, like a soft breeze on a summer evening. Still, the world around them watched with furrowed brows. Nate's mother, Mrs. Lillian Hayes, greeted Elena with a measured smile at their first meeting, the kind that pretended to be polite but carried the scent of disappointment. "You sew?" she asked. Her voice clipped. "I do," Elena replied, standing straighter. "How quaint," Lillian murmured, sipping her tea. Clara Whitmore was more direct. She appeared at a family dinner unannounced, dressed in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her presence turned heads, not because of beauty alone, but because she expected to be adored. Nate stood to greet her, the warmth in his eyes just a little too familiar. "Elena," Clara said smoothly, extending a hand. "I've heard so much about you." Her tone dripped with something Elena couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe, or mockery disguised as kindness. Clara's touch was cold. After that night, doubt began to seed itself in Elena's mind, curling at the edges of her contentment. But she dismissed it. Nate chose her. That had to mean something. 2 weeks later, he proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture. No string quartet. No cameras. Just the two of them on a garden bench, her calloused hand resting on his lap, a tiny velvet box between them. "Elena," he said, his voice suddenly unsteady, "the world has taught you not to expect good things. But I want to be one of the few who gives you one anyway." When he opened the box, the ring inside wasn't a diamond the size of a walnut. It was a delicate band with a deep blue sapphire at its center, simple, elegant, unmistakably chosen for her. She didn't cry. Not then. She simply nodded, stunned, her heart pounding like a second heartbeat in her throat. The wedding was swift. Nate insisted on something small, intimate. But small in the Hayes world still meant 200 guests and a string quartet. Elena's dress was made by her own hands, lace stitched carefully over silk, each loop a prayer that she was worthy of this joy. Liam walked her down the aisle. His eyes were red, but he smiled. "You look like you about to change the world," he whispered. "I just hope I don't break it." She and Nate exchanged vows beneath a canopy of white roses. But even as the guests clapped, Elena caught a glimpse of Clara in the back row, her expression unreadable. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. Her eyes never left Nate. That night, Elena moved into the Hayes estate as a wife. She unpacked her life into drawers lined with velvet. Her sewing machine was set up in a small sunroom, though the maids found it curious that the new Mrs. Hayes would still want to work. But Elena found comfort in the whir of thread and needle. In a house filled with glass and silence, her craft grounded her. Nate remained affectionate, though busier now. He left early for meetings, came home late, sometimes too tired to talk. But he kissed her forehead every night. He told her she made the house feel human. Yet something had shifted. At a charity event 2 weeks later, Clara appeared beside Nate as he addressed the press. She laughed at his jokes before Elena could. She placed a hand on his arm while Elena stood just a few feet away, invisible. Later that evening, as Nate scrolled through messages on his phone, Elena asked, casually, "Clara seems close to you." Nate didn't look up. "We've known each other since childhood. She's harmless." Elena nodded, smiled faintly, and turned away. But deep down, a quiet voice began to whisper. You didn't imagine the way she looked at him. The whispering shadows. Elena had always believed silence was neutral, neither cruel nor kind. But within the walls of the Hayes estate, silence had grown sharp. It sliced at her with every passing day, every unanswered question, every touch that felt more like obligation than love. Nate had become a man of polite distance. He smiled when necessary, kissed her on the forehead before sleep, complimented her dress without looking up from his phone. At first, Elena blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't interesting enough. Maybe she wasn't changing fast enough to fit his world. But something deeper stirred beneath the surface. A sense, a shadow. It started with little things, forgotten dinner plans, missed calls, half-truths wrapped in quick apologies. "I had a late meeting," Nate would say, loosening his tie. "With who?" Elena asked once, gently. "Just some old contacts. Nothing important." But he wouldn't meet her eyes. Then came the scent. Perfume. Light, floral, and expensive, lingering on his collar. It wasn't hers. Elena wore lavender oil and soap, never roses and vanilla. The first time she noticed it, she said nothing. The second time, she quietly threw his shirt into the laundry and walked out of the room with her fists clenched. One morning, while making the bed, Elena found something beneath the pillows. A delicate gold bracelet, too fine for her wrists. On the inner clasp, C.W. Clara Whitmore. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her heart a dull drum in her chest. The bracelet lay across her palm like a snake coiled to strike. She closed her fingers around it slowly and stood. That evening, as Nate poured himself a drink, she spoke without looking at him. "I found something today." He turned. "What?" "A bracelet. Under our pillows. Clara's, I think." For a moment, the air turned to glass. Nate's jaw tensed. She must have dropped it. She was here for the fundraiser last week, remember? She didn't go upstairs. He laughed, too quickly. Maybe the maid moved it. You know how things get shuffled around. Elena stared at him, trying to read the expression behind the casual smirk. But it didn't reach his eyes. It hadn't in weeks. She nodded slowly. Of course. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of Nate breathing beside her, too even, too calm, like a man with nothing to lose. The next day, she called Liam. "I need your help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't ask why. He only said, "I'm coming over." Liam arrived with tired eyes and a takeout bag. Over dinner, Elena told him everything. How Nate had changed, how Clara hovered like a ghost that wouldn't leave, how the bracelet was the final crack in the dam. Liam was silent for a while. Then he leaned forward. "Let's find out the truth. You deserve that much." The plan was simple. Liam had access to a friend who worked in hotel logistics, someone who could trace names against recent reservations. They checked the dates Nate claimed to be away on business. On one of those weekends, a luxury lodge 2 hours outside the city showed a private suite booked under a false name, but one tied to Nate's business card. The guest list included 2 meals for 2. Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just felt the slow, suffocating unraveling of a lie she had wrapped around herself like a blanket. "I need to see it with my own eyes," she said. The next morning, she borrowed Liam's car and drove to the lodge. The building was beautiful, timber-framed and set beside a still lake that reflected the late autumn sky. It looked like a scene from a fairy tale, until she saw them. Nate and Clara, standing near the dock. Clara's hand was tucked into the crook of his arm. She leaned in close, whispered something that made him laugh. He wasn't tense. He wasn't defensive. He looked happy. Elena stayed hidden behind a row of trees, her body trembling. She felt the ground tilt beneath her. Every memory, the vows, the garden bench proposal, the quiet nights, shattered like thin glass. She left before they could see her. She drove home in silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her wedding ring felt heavier than ever. That night, back in the estate, she didn't confront Nate. She set the bracelet on his nightstand and went to sleep in the guest room. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "This house is beautiful, but it's built on lies." And for the first time, Elena stopped blaming herself. She deserves better. Morning sunlight filtered through the estate's tall windows, casting gold across marble floors and cold silence. Elena stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of tea that had already gone lukewarm. Across the room, her wedding ring lay on the counter, glinting in a pool of soft light. An ornament, nothing more. She had spent the last 3 days moving quietly through the house, avoiding Nate, letting the truth settle into her bones like winter frost. Her heart no longer raced when she saw him. It didn't break. It didn't ache. It simply went still. She waited until Sunday evening. Nate returned from another meeting, smelling of expensive cologne and guilt. He loosened his tie, dropped his keys on the table, and looked up to find Elena waiting for him at the dining room table. 2 places were set. Candles flickered. The room was warm, soft, expectant. "Elena," he said, confused. "Sit," she replied. He hesitated, then obeyed, glancing around as though expecting someone else to appear. She poured him tea, calm and unshaking, then placed a small box beside his cup. He opened it. Inside was the bracelet. Clara's bracelet. Nate froze. "I saw you," Elena said, voice quiet but steady. "At the lake. At the lodge." The silence between them swelled. Elena, I can explain." "No, please don't." She looked at him now, not as a wife pleading for answers, but as a woman who finally saw the man beneath the charm. "I already know what you'll say. That it didn't mean anything. That you were confused. That I wasn't enough for this life, and you felt pressured by everyone else to marry someone different." He looked away. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Truth, spoken with clarity, cut deeper than rage ever could. "You could have chosen honesty. You could have told me you weren't ready. That Clara still mattered to you. But instead, you pretended I was your salvation. You wore me like virtue." Nate's throat bubbed. His eyes were wet now. But Elena didn't flinch. Sympathy was not forgiveness. "I married you because I believed you were better," she said softly. "Not richer, not more powerful, just better." He reached for her hand. "I'm sorry." She pulled away. "I spent most of my life being told I wasn't good enough. Too fat, too plain, too poor. And for a while, I thought your love proved them wrong." She stood, smoothing her skirt. Her voice grew stronger. "But it doesn't. Because you lied. You betrayed me not just with Clara, but with the illusion that I was finally chosen for who I was." Nate lowered his gaze. "What now?" "I'm leaving." His head snapped up. "Elena, please, don't throw this away." She almost laughed. "You threw it away. I'm just walking out of the wreckage." She didn't wait for his reply. She walked to the front hall, where her small suitcase stood ready. Liam's old pickup waited just outside the gate. As she reached for the door, Nate's voice came behind her, hoarse. "Where will you go?" She looked over her shoulder. "Anywhere I don't have to beg to be respected." And with that, she stepped out. 3 months passed. Elena moved into a tiny apartment above a second-hand bookstore on the edge of the city. She opened a modest boutique, Thread and Soul, where she sewed custom gowns for women who didn't fit into the neat boxes society had carved for them. Word spread. Women came not just for dresses, but for the kindness in Elena's eyes, for the way she took their measurements without judgment, for the way she made them feel seen. One day, a client said, "You must have had a perfect life to be so gentle." Elena smiled. "No, I just learned that healing is quieter than hurt." Nate never came, but a letter arrived, handwritten, neat, apologetic. He admitted everything, said he missed her, that he would regret losing her for the rest of his life. She read it once, then burned it in a dish by the window. Some wounds didn't need reopening. Some forgiveness didn't need to be spoken. On her birthday, Liam threw her a small party in the boutique. A banner hung crookedly, balloons drifted toward the ceiling, and laughter filled the room. Elena stood in the middle, a crown of pins tucked in her hair, a tape measure around her neck, queen of her own little kingdom. She no longer needed to be chosen. She had chosen herself.